Since the working together at the Wellness Center, when we finished that, we continued doing more softening process, and we used wire wheels to keep kind of thinning out some of the really hard spots, and then used stone tools and like 2x4s to scrape the stone tool against the 2x4, and doing a lot more hand working with it, and oiled it really heavily, and then softened it again. And that's where the flexibility of it is right now. And then after we got it as flexible as we wanted it to be, we started patching holes.
What materials are you using to patch the holes?
So it's all cotton, 100% cotton, and the thread is 100% cotton, and then, so the thread is 100% cotton, and then this is duck fabric, which is what Carhartt's made out of. I went to the store to try to find canvas, but the store wasn't selling canvas. And so this is duck is canvas. It's just a certain type of weaving of it. So as far as it's the nice thing about the duck material is it's designed to not fray. So we're using skin sewing needles, which cut. So every time you put a hole through the fabric, you're cutting the fibers rather than a blunt needle, which is pushing them apart.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have something that doesn't fray. So this is a good material for that, and it also. You want it to be 100% cotton so it doesn't shrink or shrivel like nylon or something poly blend would shrivel when it gets hot. And it's thick enough to where it's not going to like catch on fire immediately like a thinner muslin might. The inside of the hide, this is the flesh side where we were scraping the fat and the meat and the blood vessels and all of that off of. And that's going to be for the smoking purposes the inside, just like it was on the animal. And then the outside this is the hair side, and you can see where we've applied the patch to the top.
And what happens if you don't have the patch?
If you don't have the patches, too much of the smoke will get out, and then you're not forcing the smoke through the hide. So the hide is really acting as a filter. You can see here where there's a hole on the other side. It's the circle shape there, and you're just trying to do a running stitch to catch maybe 1/8 of an inch of hide on the inside to cover up the hole. And you want it to lay flat when you're doing it. It's just enough to make the patch cover it up. It's okay if smoke kind of vents through it slowly. You're not trying to like make a waterproof or airtight thing. All of this has to be cut off later. So putting all that time to make little tiny perfect stitches is just kind of a waste of time and doesn't improve your functionality at all. Here's the hole, and rather than like trying to sew 3 little tiny patches, we just have a big patch to cover it all up. And we just catch the fabric. When you're sewing leather, you want to remember that every time you put a hole in it, that hole is always going to be there because the animal can no longer heal its skin. And it's not like fabric where you pull out the pin and you can kind of rub the material a little bit and that hole disappears. You've actually cut through it. We've been working with a table because you can see everything nicely and then you can move around quickly to the different holes. It also depends on how many holes there are. If it's patching like 3, then I might just put it on my lap. I'm trying to make sure I don't put more holes in the hide that are necessary and that I keep where I put the holes in the hide close to the edge. So I'm trying to keep it close to the edge of the hide rather than going like over here and doing a patch that's big. I'm trying to really follow these outlined holes. So the stitch length, I'm doing like 1/4 inch to 1/2, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll do really big stitches that are like definitely like 1/2 inch apart, just to kind of attach the patch to keep it from moving around, and then I'll go back through and do like a second stitching where I'll do 1/2 inch stitches again, but like work between the spots where I was before. So that effectively I've now made 1/4 inch stitches. I've tacked down the whole patch, and the stitches on this side are a little bit far apart, so I'm just gonna go back over it one more time to make sure that I really got them where they needed to be. So when you're finished, you just tie off the end, and again, it's not something that's a special knot. I just tied a square knot a couple of times, and then just broke the thread with a little bit of tail. And there we go. It's nice to do the sewing or you've applied the patch to the back and you're doing the needle work from this side, because then you're able to look at your hide. You have to make sure your patch is big enough on the other side and that you're not stabbing your fingers as you sew, but this way you're not wasting any hide because you can really see how big or where your stitches need to be. And the holes that are towards the middle of the hide just take longer to patch because you have to stop and like look at what you're doing from both sides. Where this, I can just feel with my fingers what needs to happen. So this is just like a rubberized dipped glove that I usually use for when I'm pulling fish out of a net or picking fish out of the net. And what it does is it allows me to really grip the needle and pull it through instead of having to use a thimble, where like a thimble action, you're putting all that pressure on your thumb. This doesn't function as a thimble at all. It just works to pull it through. This is just faster for me because then I'm not having to stop and push. I can just always be pulling. And then what Helen has on her finger is a hide thimble that allows you to work as a thimble. These holes here were patched without, or they're just sewn shut without applying a patch because they were so small that there's a tiny bit of pucker here, but that's not really enough to worry about. If you were to take this hole here that has that white fabric and bunch this all together and try and sew this shut, if you think about now, it has a fold right here, and this doesn't lay flat anymore. There's lots of folds and ripples, and it's kind of like tie-dyeing. Wherever the t-shirt is folded, the dye can't get to as much, and it's the same with the smoke. So if you sew it like that and then smoke it, you're gonna, when you open it up, you're gonna have light patches or streaks. So that's why for bigger holes, you want to apply material as a patch. If you have something that's like the size of maybe a pencil eraser, then you can just bunch it together and sew it, but you're wanting it to lay flat as possible. Once we've gotten all the holes patched, we've left some like close to this edge rather than applying a small patch to this. When the hide is ready to have the fabric for the rest of the funnel attached, I would just put the fabric here, and all of this leading edge needs to be sewn to the material, and then I would just go, as I'm going around here, I would come up and shroop like that and just follow and catch those holes. So we used a whip stitched here to put the two pieces of hide together. We're wanting to make a cone shape, so we only sewed about maybe 2 feet of hide together at the top, and then we're adding fabric to make the rest of the cone wider. So this is a whip stitch running along here. And for the sake of this illustration, the white is hide. We've taken the two pieces of like a shoulder and a hindquarter and sewn them up like that along here. And now we have this opening here, and we're going to take a piece of canvas and sew canvas into that. And now the bottom is wider than the top. And that allows for the hide at the bottom to not be near the fire ring. We're going to sew canvas to the bottom edge of the hide, and that gives it about 3 feet of distance from the ground to where the hide starts. That also helps because the smoke rises. You need to have the hide higher up so that the bottom edge of the hide here gets smoke on it instead of it all just being up here. We'll have a patch here, and the nice thing about having a patch of canvas here is we can put kind of like a tent flap where we need to add wood to the fire, and that way we can open the flap a little bit, put wood, and then close the flap. And then on the top, we'll do the same thing where we sew canvas to the top and then have it kind of cone and funnel in up here. So if you think about this as one large teepee, that's the shape that we're trying to make. You do want a little bit of venting at the top so that the heat doesn't get too hot on the inside. Because even though it's like a smoldering fire with like that punky spruce wood, if you don't have any vent, the heat will build up inside there, even just with a smoldering fire. So the amount of canvas that we want extending from the edge of the hide to either the ground, or in this case the top of the teepee frame, is about 3 feet. So what we've done is we've laid the hide out flat to where there's not really any ripples, and it's pretty flat. There's a little bit of extra material here, but that'll be okay. And I like to put the hide on top so I can see what I'm working with. And then I know that I need, and remember that this is going to taper, so if this edge isn't quite even and it comes in a little bit, that's okay, because we're going to actually be cutting off a little excess. But we know that our piece of fabric needs to be this wide, so then we're good. We have enough. And I only need to measure one side because the material's doubled. So we're creating 2 pieces that are this width, which will give us enough to cover the hide. So then I would cut here, and then I would cut along this leading edge here. Now I have 2 pieces. So this one covers the bottom, and this one will wrap the top. Now we're just putting the fabric underneath the hide, and you need to get it to its lowest point to know that it covers. You want to sew following this live leading edge so that you're not making holes in the material. If you were just to sew straight across here, you'd be perforating that and you would have lost all of this material. When you've laid out your skin over your fabric, you may want to tack it down in a few places to keep it from moving around as you work. You want a 1/4 inch of seam. So when you're overlapping fabric, you want like a 1/4 inch. And if you're overlapping fabric with leather, you still kind of want that 1/4 inch. The leather's not going to fray, it's the fabric that will. So that's why you want the 1/4 inch of fabric, and you can do like less than an 1/8 inch on the leather side.
So do you knot the end?
Together, yep.
Okay. And use this. Okay.
It's your leg, you can use it.
Helen's sharpening the end of the needle. It's just got a little bit blunt, and it's harder to sew if you don't have a sharp needle.
This is a high spot, so I'm just tacking the canvas here so I know that it's going to cover that. And sewing, so I started sewing along this leading edge over here, and then just to get it kind of fixed in place. So we have sewn one side of the hide, top and bottom, to the fabric material, to the bottom of the hide here, and the same on the top, so we're gonna flip it over. So we're just gonna trim off this little tendril. It's something that Helen just said that she would cut off, so we're gonna cut it off and then we get a nice straighter line.
So we turned over the hide, and I was just about to start sewing again, and this area here has already been sewn, and this area here hasn't. But when I was then kind of just laying it flat, trying to get it nice and flat, this part here would be folded, and you don't want to fold the hide then, Joel?
Not that big.
No. So what would you suggest?
So if you bring the fabric over like that and create a buckle in the fabric.
So if you see now, the hide is lovely and smooth as I'm holding it down, and the fold is actually here in the fabric, not in the hide.
So we finished sewing the material to the bottom of the hide, and we need to create a door flap along what would have been the neck and the rump. A flap here, and then another flap on this side. We're sewing the flaps on to the outside just like we did the patches previously. We want the flap to overlap a little bit so that we can clamp it closed, like binder clips or clothespins. So I'm going to hold that there, and then have the fabric, Sarah's holding fabric up there, so we'll know that this is the width that this needs to be. So we're going to turn the hide inside out so that we can see what we're doing better. So this is the part where the 2 pieces of hide, where it's like a leg, a back leg and a front leg are coming together. That's really thick. And this is the part where you just kind of have to pattern make with your eye to get this all to line up and then have enough material to create the flap. And that's the part that's difficult to explain to somebody, because it's not, you just have to make sure you have enough materials in the right spots. So if you were to stop just short, you're not going to have enough to overlap. So you want to make sure when you get to this point that you have a few inches of overlap. It kind of has this curve to it, so I'm holding the shape with my hand so that it has tension as I sew to make that curve with dimensional space. So now we're getting ready to sew the kind of cone shape, and now these can be sewn together to create the cone.
And I'm just doing a very quick whip stitch just to join those two together.
So that's the top of the cone. That is what the tops poles of the teepee structure will go through, and then it would also vent a little bit of the smoke out too, and the heat out as well.
So we've seen how Joel and Helen worked in a sort of tent shape for their final smoke. Speaking with Jeanie Maxim, she sews it onto 3 sides to make it into a rectangular shape, and then just on the bottom she'll sew a canvas around it to cover the tub where she puts the punky wood and creates the smoke, and then hangs it from a triangle frame on the corners, suspended at the top, so the smoke can rise up.
So we've been talking and working with Charlie Hubbard, who's one of the Ahtna elders, and he likes to sew it up like Jeanie does, where it's like the 3 sides, and then you kind of do an extender with the canvas in the bottom and do the final smoke that way. And one of the things he talks about with that is that the nice thing about doing like the pillowcase method is that there's no pull lines on the inside. You don't have to rotate the height.
So I've been following a lot of my colleagues in Canada, and one of the things that they do is they do their final smokes, or the sort of chimney rectangular method inside of a tent, you know, so they don't it's not so weather dependent. So if it rains, they don't have to wait the next day. They can do it all at once, and they can watch it, you know. And then it's also kind of creating like an easy way to integrate it in your life, you know, where you can work on it when you have time, you know. So if you have a tent structure, that just gives another level of fluidity and help.